Hello everybody, it's Millie here again, and I am just wanting to do a demonstration on how to do my Santa's Helpers elf dolls hair. So as you've probably seen, you've the elf dolls on the pattern cover, and as you can see I have sewn their hair with chain stitch with some really fine baby yarn. Now this would be the advanced I don't mind spending 2 days sewing hair way if you want to go about it. Now, to me, I find it's worth it, but I completely understand if you don't want to bite off that much. So there's sort of 3 different levels of hair. So we have this doll, which is probably the most difficult with doing it all via chain stitch. Then for my boy elf, I can't show you because I've actually already secured down his hat. But for him, I just did also chain stitch the hair, but I only chain stitched it to just above where the rim of the hat will go. So I only had to do this amount and this amount, which cut it down considerably from the girl. Also, obviously, he doesn't have the little plaits, so that made that a little bit easier as well. But we can go down to what I'm going to show you today, which is actually using paint to do our doll's hair. So I'm about to just get started. I'm about to mix some paint colours to match my fabrics of my doll. Now I'm just using these Montmartre fabric paints that I have. Now I don't necessarily like the colours as they are, so I'm going to do a little bit of colour mixing to get the colours that I like. But otherwise you could just purchase the one small fabric paint in the colour that you want to use rather than buying a whole pack like this. I just like to mix my colours, so I wanted all of the colours available to me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just mix up my first colour, and I'm just going to do one side I'll show the boy and on the other side I'll show the girl so that I can demonstrate also how to do the plaits. Okay, so let me mix up my paints and I will be back shortly. Okay, so I'm back again and I have mixed together some paint. Obviously you would want to make it a colour that fits in with your fabrics. Now what I recommend before we start is that you want to mark on your hairline onto your doll. So the best way to do that is to actually pop on your hat where it's going to sit. So that's where my hat's going to sit. That's where it has to sit because the ears are there, right? So I want the hair to be poking just outside of that hat, and I want the hair to be coming down. You'll see it on the diagram, but I recommend you don't trace this on until you get to this stage because stuffing always changes the shape, size, etc. of a doll, and once it gets 3D it just puts things different to what you expect. So I think it's always good to draw it at this stage. Now we're painting over it, so don't get too worried about your lines as they will be covered by the paint. Right, but I suggest using something like a grey lead. I was going to use my heat vanishing pen, but I'm worried that the paint might stop that from working afterwards. So I just want to make sure we get it covered. So basically what I did with my other doll and what I'm going to do with this doll as well is that I want to do a little central, I know that's kind of where I want the part to be. Now also then I know I want it to come down to around here because I will need to do her little plaits, her little side plaits. So we've got that shape, and if we have a look at the original doll, you'll see that I've just done a very slight curve. Now you can shape it however you like at this stage. It really is up to you what you want to do, but that's how I've shaped it, and that's roughly how I'm going to do it now as well. So we've got the parting going there, and then I know I want to come to here. So I'm just going to do a slight curve like that, and then try and do the same on the other side. Now just watch that you're being balanced as possible anyway. And there we go. I have her hair marked in place. All right, so I can take that off now. So I know if I'm doing this doll, if I'm doing the girl, I'm also going to have the hair go around the back. Now I'm not going to mark that on right now because I'm actually going to do the boy on the other side to show you that. But I can, if I was doing just the girl, now extend that line. You've got that place where it's ended on both sides, and then you can just extend that and just go across from side to side, just to give it a nice kind of slightly curved line back wherever you want the hair to finish. Okay, I think what I want to do is I'm just going to tape up her ears. I think that I'm just being careful here. I just want to make sure I'm not going to get any paint on her ears as I'm going. So I'm just going to tape them up because I think it could be very easy to get paint on those. I don't mind if it gets on the very edge, but I don't want obviously it to get on the tips or anywhere there. So that's just a good little tip that I've come up with just now. We're just going to tape up those ears. Okay, I just feel like that's a little bit safer. Okay, now I'm going to now paint her hair. So I've got two brushes here. I've got a little fine brush in case I need to do any sort of fixing up on the hairline. And then I've got my larger brush to fill area. So what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to start painting on her hair. Now I think this fabric is going to be really thirsty, so I hope I've got enough paint here. So I'm probably just going to fast forward this. I'm just going to paint that front hairline. Okay, so I've basically painted all the front hairline of this one now. Now I suggest you just keep looking over it. Just check if there's any thin areas where you feel like you need to do a little bit more. You can clean up that edge a little bit more if you want to. I am actually, as I mentioned before, going to stitch over that very edge later on just to give it a nicer look. Of course, that is purely optional. I'm just going to let this dry now. So I'm going to go and mix up my other paint. So I shall be back again shortly. Okay, so I'm back again. I've mixed up my blue. So what I'm going to just do now is mark out my boy's hair. So as you can see here, looking at the boy, I've done a side parting and then given him a couple of little flicks or fringes sections. So I'm just going to draw that. Again, you will have these lines on your templates, but please don't draw them until now. So again, I can't pop on his hat because I've got the wet paint still on the other side. But before you do this, make sure you pop on your hat so you have a bit of an idea where the hat ends. I think that the hat's going to end around here on this one, just as a rough idea. So I want to do a side parting, which I'm just going to draw there. One side is going to be the same as what we did for the girl in that I'm just going to, and this one I kind of curved inwards, just going to go down to the same sort of place that I did for the girl's hair, just matching it up there. And then for the other side, I've done kind of two little sections going in. So what I first want to do is just do the first bit. So just follow your template. You can cut out your template obviously and sit it on here and trace it if you want to, or you can just freehand it like I'm doing. They're really very easy shapes. Just make sure that your pencil is inside where you want the paint to finish, if that makes sense. So you want to make sure that the pencil lines that you do are going to be fully covered by paint. You don't want them to be visible on the doll unless you use a vanishing marker. Obviously that is a good idea. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and paint the boy's hair. Okay, so I finished his hair now and I'm pretty happy with that. As you can see, I have managed to make another mark or two because it's on my hands. So I really recommend that you have a wet towel, wet sponge, even some wet wipes close at hand so that if you start getting any paint on your hands, you can quickly clean that off. Fabric paint is water soluble, so it's very easy to wipe up. Also, another great idea would be to paint the front of your doll's head first. Let that dry before you paint the back of the head. That'll just allow you to actually rest the head against a surface while you paint. Okay, so I finished my painting and that's all nice and dry now. I'm not getting any residue coming onto my fingers, so I know it's nice and dry. Now, a little bit of good news for you. As you may remember, I had those 2 little blue spots on the body as well that I had gotten off from my fingers. Now, I just wanted to let you know, if you do accidentally get a little spot of fabric paint somewhere, you probably have a good 5 to 10 minutes in order to go and get that, and you can actually still clean it off. So I just went downstairs, grabbed a wet tea towel, just a damp corner of a tea towel, and I just wiped, and I got off those 2 blue spots. Now just make sure you follow the instructions of whatever paints you're using. But the instructions of my paint say to cover it with fabric, and I've just got a scrap bit of fabric here, and to give it an iron. Okay, so I feel like that's done adequately. You probably noticed then halfway through I was doing that, I just removed those little bits of tape so that I could get into those edges nicely. But I've given that a good iron, so that should make sure that the fabric paint is hopefully watertight and a lot more stable on the product. So what I'm going to do is show you the different options to pop edges on the hair. Now you can leave it exactly how it is. That would be the most basic way to do the hair. Obviously if it's the boy, job done, it's finished, pop on his hat, pop on his clothes, job done, and that was really, really quick and easy. For the girl, you probably still want her plaits. That's up to you, but what I'm going to quickly show is how we could outline it with stitching, just to give it a little bit more definition. That's just an option. I think it will look really nice with the girl if we're doing the plaits. So I'm just going to show you now first with the boy. What I have here is embroidery floss. I think if we're not doing the entire hair like I did with the chain stitch, embroidery floss would be the best option. It's a little bit finer. So I've got a nice colour to match here that I found in my stash. This blue is much brighter than I'd hoped to do his hair, but that's okay. It's still the right shade, even if it's a lot darker. So I'm just going to get my thread, and I've got here the full 6 strands of my embroidery floss. And I have just tied a knot there in the end. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sink the knot from the body. So I know that the clothing is going to cover up down here. So I'm just going to bring my needle up from the body, up to that there. All right, so I'm just going to bring my needle through. And when that stops at the body, we're just going to do a little tug, and that will sink in, okay? Now, with this one, I'm just going to do a simple back stitch for the edging for the boy, because I think that would be the simplest way to do the edging, is just to do a nice simple back stitch. So we can just use that outer edge of the hair as a guide, and it's just going to really neaten off that edge. Just if you've got any little bits of paint that aren't quite perfect along the edge, I think this is just going to end off and outline that really nicely. So just make sure that you're obviously going in at the same point as you go out, and we're just doing a simple back stitch. Now don't pull your threads tightly. We don't want to pucker our head, just wanting to just pull it till it's finished basically. So I'm just going to speed this up a little bit so you can watch me as I go. Okay, so I've just stitched around there. I'm just going to take the last stitch, and I just want to show you how I finish it off as well. So same as how I did when I'm starting, I'm just going to make a little knot in my thread, and I want it to be just a little bit longer than what my next stitch length will be. So you'll see how I'm making my knot go there. It's a bit further along than my next stitch is, just to make sure it will pull in nicely. And then I'm going to take that last stitch. I'm going to take my needle out somewhere that doesn't matter, so where I know it'll go below the neckline of the collar, And then once that knot gets stuck, you just again do a little tug and that will sink in, and then I can just cut that thread right at the fabric. Okay, so there is the lovely edging that I've done to this with 6 strands of embroidery floss. Now, I think that looks really, really good. I'm actually really, really pleased with that result. As you can see, it's just given us a little bit more of a handmade sewn feel, but it's also just smoothed off and defined that edge. You could also, if you wanted to, backstitch the parting. I'm going to do that the same on the girl here, which I will just do very quickly. And then I'm going to show you how I make the plaits. So what I'm going to do is I may as well, as I start, give my first length of thread to my first plait. So what I'm just going to do is I'm going to grab a length of the embroidery floss, which is longer than what I need. So I'm going to make it quite a bit longer because I want a bit at the front and a bit at the other side to just start off my plait. And so I'm just going to get a nice length there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tie a knot around, you're looking at around 20 centimeters from the head. I'm going to guess is around there. So I've just done a little knot there at the point where it's 20 centimeters. I'm going to thread my needle, and then I'm going to start at this end. I don't need to sink my knot this time. I actually just want this knot to go at the starting point to be part of my plait. Okay, so it's there, it stops there. I just want it to stay there. All right, so just keep the knot there, and then you can start doing your back stitching. So again, you're just going along the very edge of that painted hairline, and I will fast forward this section until I get to the other end. Okay, so I'm now back to the other end. So I've just backstitched all the way from that longer strand at the beginning, all the way across and to the other side. Now I also, as you can see here, I decided to do the parting. Now, so I didn't go the whole way because I'm just pretending that on this doll I intend to secure down the hat. So I just did it up to a height where I knew that once I've secured my hat down, it's going to cover that and just show that first little bit of the parting there. Okay, so what I've also done is I have not secured anything off. I've just left the tail there. Again, you can trim that down to be about the same length as the other one. Doesn't need to be a science, but as close as possible to that one. So now obviously we need a whole lot more strands of hair coming out the sides in order to create our plaits. So what I'm going to do is just take a doll maker's needle. So what I'm just going to do is get some lengths of my embroidery floss that are equal to what I have here, or a little bit longer so I can trim them down. So we're looking at, I'm going to go a little bit longer, okay, just to make sure I'm safe. And I am going to take, I want 15 in total. So I've already got the one strand there. So I want to get another 14 lengths. And 14, and that's used up basically all of my skein of thread, okay, to get that amount. So that was the perfect amount to do my embroidery and then also get those 14 lengths. So if you're not getting quite 14, then maybe just make them a little bit shorter so that you know you are getting them close to. So what I'm going to do is cut all of these lengths so that they're all individual, and take one of those. Now again, with the first one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie off around the same length as where that one was tied off. Okay, so again, about 20 centimeters. I'm just going to tie that one off at that point. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to thread the longer side. So the 20 centimeters is the shorter side. I'm going to thread the longer side, and I'm going to go in with this from the alternate side that I had the knot. So on this side before I had the knot there. So this time I'm going to go from the other side, just so that we only have half knots on each end. Just go in right about that same place. Get your doll's making needle and guide it to the other side. Sometimes you need to go in and out multiple times, as you can see I'm doing, till you get the right spot. Now, it doesn't have to be perfectly in the perfect spot because we're going to be plaiting this, so it's okay if they go in a little bit of a wider area. Now that's going to stop at that knot, and then I just need to pull out the thread at the other end. Okay, so there we go. So now we've got two either side that are roughly the right same length. So we're going to keep doing this. I'm just going to fast forward. Okay, so there we are. I've threaded through all of those pieces of floss. Now look, I know I showed you at the beginning to tie a knot at the start of each one. I ended up not doing that as I continued on. I just threaded them through and pulled them equally to both sides as I went. Up to you which way you want to go. I just don't think it's going to pull too much as I'm plaiting it, and obviously once they're plaited they're secured in place. So we've got 15 on each side, so I'm obviously now going to plait these. So we want to separate them into 3 lots of 5. So we've got 5 strands there. Okay, so just keep going, and then at some stage we're just going to test it and see the length. I think that's possibly around the same as what my last one was. I'm just going to check how long that is when I loop it over. And does that make me happy? If that length makes me happy, I can finish there. I think I'm just going to do it a tiny bit longer. Okay, so I've just done that a little bit longer. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly tie this off, length of thread, just so that it's secure. I'm actually going to sew it to make it more secure. Okay. And then I can trim that nice and close there. All right, so the rest of this you're going to see on the pattern. So I'm going to refer you back to the pattern now. If you want to, if you're not feeling confident with your knot, please sew that along like I have mentioned in the actual pattern to make sure that's really secure. So the next steps we're going to do, which I show in the pattern, is we're just going to secure that there, and then we're going to tie its little bow. Hi everybody, it's Melly here, and I've just come to do a quick tutorial on sewing your hair onto your elves. So I have finished this gorgeous little girl elf here, and I'm about to start putting her hair on. So what I've done first is I've kind of marked the general area of the hair. Now I've kind of just used my darts here in the neck to base as my center line or parting. And what I actually also did was I popped her hat on just to see where I wanted the hair to actually start so that it was seen with the hat on. So I wanted the parting to be just basically right where the hat is starting. So that's how the hat's going to sit once it's on. And I just wanted the parting to start right there and go around to the sides. Now we are going to do the lovely little buns at either side for the girl. For the boy, you can mark the hairlines and just follow the hairlines as you wish. I might come back and just do a quick little picture of how I've put that together. But this is for the girl elf. So you pop the hat on, have a look at what it looks like. I just want her hair to come, have a little parting down to there and go to either side, and the same there. So I've marked that all in. I have given a little bit of a guide on the sewing pattern, but of course, please check it yourself because these toys do tend to change in shape and head size, and as you stuff them, it depends. You might put more stuffing up the top than you do on the bottom or vice versa, and it might just change around the head shape a little bit. So it's always a good idea to mark that on once everything is stuffed and once you have a bit of an idea of how the head looks. So I am using some yarn for this. Now I have mentioned which yarn I liked to use in the requirements. So excuse that you're just looking at my lap here. I think this is just going to be the easiest for me while I'm working. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a length of my thread. Now I have been measuring them to be about 80 centimeters, but honestly just start with a certain length and then decide. I'm going with about 80 centimeters here. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to tie a knot a while up. So you'll see there, that's probably a good 26 centimeters down that I'm tying this knot. Now you may do it less or more, it just depends on how big you want those buns at the side to be. But I'm just doing this as a larger amount just to be safe. I prefer to be safe than sorry. So we'll just tie that at that end, and then the other end is where I'm going to thread the needle. So there we go, we'll thread that. Now the way I have chosen to do this is I'm using reverse chain stitch. So I'll show you how I do that, and it just makes it a lot easier to work the way we want to work and to make it that we have our leftover thread here at this side to create our buns. So the knotted end is the longer end, okay, and that's the end that we threaded. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take for my first line of chain stitches, I'm going to go from here to here. So I'm just going to take it in here and I'm going to do a tiny little back stitch at this end. Now that's going to stop there at that knot, and that's what we want. These later on, these threads are going to become the plait at the side, okay. So I'm just going to take a small little stitch, little tiny back stitch there, and take my needle out a little bit further up, the length that I want my chain to be, okay. Now the bigger the chains you do, obviously the less stitching you have to do, but you know, balance that between what you'd like the looks of compared to what you have the patience and energy to do. All right, so I've just got that tiny little back stitch there. Now we don't need to worry about him because he will actually be covered later on with the bun. All right, so we don't need to worry too much about that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to just use that tiny little back stitch to start my first chain. Now it's only on that first one that you need to do that tiny little back stitch. And then what I'm going to do is I'm putting my thread back right next to that, and then coming back up again about the length that I want my chain stitches to be, and pull. Now there's my first chain stitch. So it's used that little back stitch as its anchor. Now we're going to use each chain as an anchor. So this next chain stitch is I'm going to go under through that chain. Try and make sure I'm not catching her arm all the time. Okay, and then that goes in next to that. Again, the length of my chain. So there you'll see, there's my second chain. Now I'm going to go through that chain, underneath, and through. Next to it, length of the chain, and I'm just using that line that I just drew before. Now make sure you draw that line with a erasable marker. This is a friction pen, so heat will get rid of that line, so I'm not worried about that line being there. Under. So you'll see that this is chain stitch in reverse, which is why it's called reverse chain stitch. Basically the same concept as a chain stitch, but done in reverse. It actually makes it a lot easier, especially when working on a surface like this, and a lot easier to get even and neat. I think we've just got this second last one and then one more to go to get to the parting. So we're getting to that parting point and I want to stop exactly at that parting line. So this last stitch, what I'm going to do is take it through like I have with the others, and then rather than putting the thread right next to it like I have on the other ones, just sort of keep the chain open, I'm now actually going to go right in the same hole. But what I'm going to do first is I'm going to tie a little knot, which I'm going to sink. So what you want to do is tie a little knot that's about the length of what your next stitch to go in is going to be, away from the end. I'm going to take that last stitch into that hole. I'm just going to take my thread out to the other side. It doesn't matter where, this is all going to get covered with stitches. I'm just doing it through to anywhere. When that knot stops, little pull. I hope you heard that little click. That was it, that knot getting sunk underneath the fabric. So that's that line done. Now you can see I took way too much thread. I've got a lot left over. The next one I'm going to do, I'm actually going to do going up along the side of the head of the front up to the middle part there. Okay, so what I'm going to do is take probably one about the same length because that actually is a longer area. Again, I'm going to tie a knot roughly around the same place as the last one, so about there. You don't have to be precise with these. Obviously, we just want to make sure they're about the same length so that we're able to do that plait later. And I'm not going to do it with all of the lines of hair. We're just going to do it with a few at the front, a few at the back, so that we have enough there to plait and to make into our buns. Probably around 12, I think. 12 strands, maybe. Okay, so there's that one. So now what I'm going to do is thread that again. Okay, so what I'm going to do is this line up here. So I'm just going to take the next thread to where I want to start. Okay, so again it stopped at that knot. So there's our second little bit for a plait later. Keep them out of the way. And then I'm going to start again. So again, I just want to do a tiny little stitch there, which is going to be my securing stitch. And just a itty bitty one. And then I want to take my thread out at the length I want my chain stitches to be. Okay, so again, we're going to use that tiny little back stitch as the anchor stitch for my first chain. Okay, and through next to that. And then put the needle up the distance for the length of my second chain. I'm going to do exactly the same as what we did for the other one. I'm going to continue up. Now I'm going just inside that side seam. Okay, the chains actually have a bit of thickness to them, width to them, so you want to go just slightly inside the seam. And then the last one on that line. And as mentioned before, with this last one, I am going to sink my knot. So I'm just going to take a little knot close to the length of that last stitch, like that, like so. And then I'm going to take that last stitch into there, just take it out anywhere to the other side and sink that knot. And then I can cut it right there. Okay, so we've made the outline shape of her hair there, and now I'm just going to continue to do the same thing. I'm just going to go up that side, and it's going to slowly get smaller and smaller, obviously, as we go in. And as I said, we probably only want 15 of these, so some of them can be done at the back as well. So from the front, we probably want to have either 6 or it just depends on how it goes. So I'm going to take my next length, which I'm going to make a bit smaller this time. Now you may ask, why don't I continue along the other side or continue with the thread? I could, and you can, feel free to do so. Again, I'm making more work for myself, but the reason I'm doing this is because I want to have it all going in the one direction, so it looks like strands of hair in a way. Okay, so we've threaded another one, got the knot there. So I'm going to take this one. I don't think I need to do another little back stitch this time because I'm just going to use this one back here. Don't need to do too many of them. So we'll take the thread through, it'll stop at the knot. Okay, and I'm actually just going to go through that back stitch we used on the last one because I think that that's fine to use again. As I said, this little area is going to get covered, so don't get too worried about how beautiful that looks there. So I've done that to start my first stitch. Now I'm going to kind of alternate the length of these. So rather than have them lined up with the chains there, I'm going to kind of make sure that they aren't lined up, if that makes sense. I'm going to make sure they kind of alternate. So this chain sort of starts halfway through where the other chain started, etc. Just so it kind of fills up all the gaps of space. I feel like if I made them all the same length and shape, they would end up having gaps. So I'm kind of nesting them in together. And again, stopping right on that parting. Did a little bit better with my length of thread this time. And then we're going to tie off to sink the knot on that last stitch. And sink my knot. All right, beautiful. So again, now I'm going to do my second one up that side. Okay, so back for a moment. I've just finished the front of the hair for my elf girl and just wanted to show you exactly what I've done. Now, as you can see, I have her hat on here now. She's still got to get her little bell at the end there. But you can see how with the hat on now, I just like the amount of hair showing there. You just see the tiny little first part of her parting. As mentioned before, later on these are going to become her little side buns or plait. Still haven't decided. I'll wait to see when I do that. But I just want to show you the whole head. So I have done the whole thing now all the way at the front. Now I am letting you know this is seriously a labour of love. So this has taken about, I would guess at around 8 hours to get this amount done. So what I'm going to do is when I'm doing the back, I'm just going to quickly show how it can be done a lot quicker. I'm going to go a lot larger with those chain stitches and just show you how obviously it can be achieved much quicker. And as mentioned before as well, don't forget that you can also only embroider the parts that are going to be exposed. So by looking at the hat down like that, I can see that really I only needed to go up to about there in order to cover that if I wanted to stick down or sew down the hat onto my doll. So I'll be back in one moment. I'm just going to set up my thread and then we'll start on the back. And I do want to add a few more threads there for the side plait. Okay, so I'll be back in one moment. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my stitches a lot bigger this time at the back just to cover that area a bit sooner. So again, like I did with the front, I've grabbed a piece of thread and I have tied a knot at that 25 centimetre area that I did before because I do want to add some more threads into this plaited area. So we're going to do exactly like what we were doing before, and I'm just going to take my first stitch into there, adding to the previous braid, and I'm just going to start off there. So that's added to our thickness. And what I'm going to do is just take that first little stitch that we use as the anchor. And then this time I'm going to travel quite a lot further than I had been previously. So that's probably about double the length of my chains previously. I just wanted to have a bit of a look to see how much quicker I can fill this area, as it was a little bit ridiculous I did on the front. I think I would like to continue to do the back like I did the front, just because I actually really enjoy that sort of tighter look. But you know, I'm never going to get onto my boy elf if I just keep doing that all the time. So let's just see how much we can speed this up a bit by really increasing the size of these chains. Okay, so there's my last stitch going that way. Now I'm just going to tie that off and sink it. And then take that last stitch, which pulled very tightly there, but the good thing is I can loosen that right up. And then I'm going to do my upward row going up along the side of the head. So as we get up to this stage, you can kind of see how my chains are about double the length, actually even maybe slightly more than double the length of the previous ones, which is why this is going to go a whole lot quicker. So I'm just going to continue sewing this around. I hope you've got the idea now. As mentioned, I'm going to make sure I get a total of 15 of these here. So I've now got 9, so I want to add another 6 in. All right, so I'm just going to continue stitching. I'll fast forward for a little while I'm doing this.